The stars had never looked so cold. Lieutenant Thorson Hayes pressed his palm against the viewing port of the transport ship, watching the swirling nebulae that had once filled him with wonder now serve as nothing more than a backdrop to his imprisonment. The diplomatic mission to the Outer Rim had been a trap from the beginning. He should have known when the Galactic Alliance offered humanity a seat at the negotiation table that it was too good to be true. The plasma shackles around his wrists hummed with energy, a constant reminder that he was no longer a soldier of the human expeditionary force, but property of the Alliance. Around him, dozens of other assets sat in similar restraints, warriors from 100 different worlds all bound for the same fate, the fighting pits of Nexus Station. "Welcome to your new home meat," growled the guard, a massive Krokani whose chitinous exoskeleton bore the scars of countless battles. The transport shuddered as they docked with the station. Through the speakers, a melodious voice in perfectly accented standard announced their arrival. "All combat assets report to Processing Bay 7 for medical evaluation and classification. Remember, survival is optional, entertainment is mandatory." The Processing Bay reeked of disinfectant and fear. Thorson shuffled forward in line with the other captives, each one subjected to a series of scans, injections, and what the guards euphemistically called behavioral assessments. Some prisoners wept, others raged against their muns. Thorson did neither. He watched, learned, and waited. When his turn came, he was directed to a smaller examination room where a figure in medical whites waited. She turned as he entered, and Thorson felt his breath catch. The woman was clearly Vulparian. Her skin had the characteristic silver-blue hue of her species, and her eyes were the deep violet that spoke of noble bloodlines. But there was something in those eyes, a flicker of compassion. "I am Tyra," she said simply, gesturing for him to sit on the examination table. "Hold still." Her scanner hummed as it passed over his body, cataloging injuries, strengths, and weaknesses. When it came to the old scar across his forehead, a memento from his first battle with Saurian raiders, she paused. "This is well healed," she murmured, her fingers tracing the mark with surprising gentleness. "You've seen combat before." "Too much," Thorson replied, meeting her gaze. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that transcended species. Tyra's hand lingered on his shoulder for just a moment too long before she stepped back, recording her findings on a data pad. "The scanner shows optimal physical condition," she announced to the guard monitoring the session. "Classification Prime Combat Asset Arena Standard." As Thorson was led away, Tyra called after him softly, "The med bay stocks Terracen root extract. It helps with pain and other things." That night, in the cramped cell block reserved for new arrivals, Thorson found a small vial tucked beneath his thin mattress. The Terracen root extract would indeed help with pain, but something told him Tyra's gift meant more than simple medical treatment. His first fight came 3 days later. The arena was a marvel of engineering brutality. The curved walls rose hundreds of meters into the station's superstructure, lined with viewing boxes where the galaxy's elite watched lesser beings tear each other apart for sport. The floor was scattered with obstacles, broken pillars, sand pits, and energy barriers that shifted without warning. Thorson faced a hegemony pit fighter named Fractus, a creature of living metal and synthetic muscle whose previous 19 victories were carved in runic script across his chassis. The crowd roared its approval as the gladiators circled each other waiting for the starting signal. The horn blasted, and Fractus charged with hydraulic fury. Thorson rolled aside, letting the creature's momentum carry him into a pillar. Metal shrieked against stone, and Thorson struck with the simple plasma blade issued to all new fighters. The weapon scored a line across Fractus's back, drawing sparks instead of blood. The fight lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, Fractus lay in pieces across the arena floor, his artificial life force finally extinguished. Thorson stood victor, his blade raised high as the crowd cheered for blood well spilled. In the med bay afterward, Tyra cleaned his wounds with the same careful touch she'd shown during his examination. "You fought well," she said quietly, "but the next opponent will be stronger." "I know," Thorson replied. "Why are you helping me?" Tyra's hands stilled. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you're fighting for something more than survival. I can see it in your eyes. Fight after fight." Thorson carved his way through the arena's ranks. He battled the multi-armed Zentaxi warrior priest Kethavar. He faced down the energy vampire, known only as the Shade. He even survived a three-way combat against two Andromedan berserkers who had previously been unbeatable as a team. With each victory, the crowds grew larger, the stakes higher, and with each visit to the medbay, his connection with Tyra deepened. She began sharing more than just medical advice. Intelligence about upcoming opponents, weak points in arena security, and stories of her past that painted her as far more than a simple doctor. "I used to have a different life," she told him one evening, as she treated a particularly nasty burn from an opponent's plasma whip. "Before I was, reassigned to Nexus Station." "What happened?" She smiled sadly. "I made choices that certain people found unacceptable." Their relationship evolved in stolen moments between battles. Sometimes it was just a touch that lasted longer than necessary. Other times, when the medbay was empty, they would talk for hours about their worlds, their dreams, and the life they might have had in different circumstances. After his 23rd consecutive victory, Thorson's whole world changed. He had just defeated the Titan of Kepler, a genetically enhanced brute whose 4 arms could crush starship hull plating. The fight had been brutal, leaving Thorson with 3 cracked ribs and a concussion that made the arena lights blur into painful stars. But he had won, and the crowd's approval echoed like thunder. That night, instead of Tyra coming to him, it was Magron, the arena's chief overseer. The creature's multi-jointed legs clicked against the floor as he approached Thorson's cell. "Congratulations, human," Magron hissed, his compound eyes glittering with cruel amusement. "Your medical attendant has been selected for a great honor." Thorson was on his feet instantly, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "What honor?" "Warlord Droskar has claimed her for his collection. She will serve as physician to his household, and as bride-to-be according to the old customs." The words hit Thorson like a blast from a graviton cannon. "You can't!" "I can, and I have. The doctor's previous identity has been revealed. She is Princess Tyra of House Veltherin, daughter of the late Vulperian king. Her bloodline will strengthen Droskar's claim to her homeworld." "She's a prisoner. You have no right." Magron's laughter was the sound of grinding gears. "The rights of royalty are complicated things, human, especially when that royalty has been hiding among the staff of my arena. She leaves for Droskar's fortress tonight." Thorson lunged forward, but the cell's force field sent him sprawling. Magron leaned closer, his voice dropping to a poisonous whisper. "But I bring good news as well. Your victories have earned you the right to compete in the Grand Championship. Win that, and by ancient law, you may claim the champion's privilege, the right to form a team and undertake one task of your choosing." The implication was clear. Win the championship, and he might have a chance to save Tyra. Lose, and she would be lost forever. The Grand Championship was unlike anything Thorson had faced before. It wasn't a single fight, but a series of escalating combats over 5 days, each more lethal than the last. He fought automated death machines in mock starship corridors. He battled a pack of Zeranian shadow wolves in a replica alien jungle. He even faced a corrupted AI that tried to kill him with words as much as weapons. But the final battle was what legends were made of. Vexnar the Undying had ruled the arena for 7 years. The creature was a fusion of organic and mechanical parts, rebuilt after each death with improvements and upgrades. His body was a patchwork of gleaming metal and regenerating flesh, and his weapons were integrated into his very being. The crowd fell silent as the 2 champions faced each other across the arena floor. This was no ordinary fight. This was a duel that would be remembered for generations. Vexnar attacked with the patience of a predator who had never truly been threatened. His arm-mounted plasma cannons fired in perfect sequence, forcing Thorson to weave between pillars and barriers. Energy blades extended from the creature's forearms, crackling with lethal potential. For 10 minutes, Thorson could only dodge and defend. Vexnar's centuries of combat experience showed in every movement. The creature had fought and defeated warriors from across the galaxy, learning from each encounter, incorporating new tactics into his repertoire. But Thorson had something Vexnar didn't expect: the memory of every piece of advice Tyra had given him. She had shared the weaknesses she'd observed in different species, the blind spots in arena security systems, and most importantly, the location of Vexnar's original organic heart hidden beneath layers of armor plating. The turning point came when Thorson deliberately took a glancing blow from one of Vexnar's energy blades, using the momentum to roll beneath the creature's guard. His own blade found the tiny gap in the armor that Tyra had described, sliding between plates to pierce the organic heart within. Vexnar the Undying died for the final time, his massive form crashing to the arena floor as his systems finally failed. The crowd exploded into cacophony as Thorson stood over his fallen opponent, bloodied but victorious. Magron himself descended to the arena floor, his multiple limbs carrying him with surprising grace. Champion Hayes, the Overseer intoned formally, "You have earned the right to speak your desire." Thorson's voice carried across the suddenly quiet arena. "I claim the champion's privilege. I choose my team, and I demand the return of Princess Tyra of House Veltherin." Magron's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "The princess is beyond your reach, champion. She is to be wed to Warlord Druskar on his fortress world, but the law is the law. Choose your team." Thorson had spent his recovery time between fights, making allies among the other gladiators. Xanthos, an 8-foot-tall warrior whose insectoid species valued honor above all else. Brick, a Terran mountain of muscle whose loyalty had been earned through shared bloodshed. Cora, a Zentaxi assassin whose 4 arms could wield separate weapons with deadly precision. Jax, a tech specialist whose neural implants let him interface with any computer system. And finally, Elra, a disgraced former member of the Vulparian Royal Guard who had ended up in the arena after being falsely accused of treason. When she learned of Tyra's true identity and fate, her yellow eyes had burned with a fury that promised violence. The team assembled in Thorson's quarters the night before their departure. The champion's privilege granted them access to better weapons armor and a fast ship, but they all knew it was likely a suicide mission. "Droskar's fortress is on Hectos Prime," Elra explained, spreading a holographic map between them. "The planet is tidally locked with his stronghold built into the frozen wastes of the dark side. The approach is protected by automated defense platforms and patrol fleets." "Security systems?" Jax asked, already interfacing with available data. "Military grade, but with weaknesses. The fortress was originally a mining complex. There are maintenance tunnels that bypass the main checkpoints." Xanthos clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "How many defenders?" "At least 1,000. Droskar keeps a personal army of mercenaries and automated units, but..." Elra paused, her expression darkening. "The wedding ceremony is scheduled for 3 days hence. Many of his forces will be deployed elsewhere for security." Thorson studied the tactical display, planning their approach. The fortress was practically impregnable, but they weren't planning a siege. This would be a surgical strike. The journey to Hectos Prime took 2 days in the modified courier ship that came with the champion's privilege. During the flight, the team prepared with grim determination. Weapons were cleaned and checked. Armor was fitted and tested. Battle plans were reviewed and revised. On the night before their arrival, Thorson found himself unable to sleep. He stood in the ship's observation deck, staring out at the stars and thinking of violet eyes and silver skin. Elra joined him at the viewport, her own gaze distant. "She saved my life once." the Vulparian said quietly. When I was framed for treason, she provided evidence that proved my innocence, too late to save my position, but early enough to save my neck. Why didn't she reveal her identity in the arena? Because she was already being hunted. Droskar had orchestrated her father's death and her exile. If he had known she was within his reach? Elra's hands clenched into fists. She chose exile and obscurity to save her people from his wrath. And now she's walking into his hands willingly, because she hopes her sacrifice will prevent a war that would consume both our worlds. Thorson was quiet for a long moment. Then, we won't let that happen. Hectos Prime hung before them like a wounded moon, half bright with reflected starlight, half dark with eternal night. The fortress was a cluster of lights on the dark side, visible even from orbit, as a sprawling complex of towers and walls carved into the planetary crust. Their approach had to be perfect. Too fast and the automated defenses would shred them. Too slow and patrol ships would intercept them. Jax guided them through the defense grid with a combination of technical skill and electronic warfare, making their ship appear as just another supply transport. The landing was made in a shallow crater 20 kilometers from the fortress. From there, they proceeded on foot through the frozen wasteland, their breath forming crystals in the bitter cold despite their thermal gear. The maintenance tunnels Elra had mentioned were their way in. Jax's implants allowed him to override the access codes, and they crawled through service pipes barely wide enough for a human body. The air recyclers provided breathable atmosphere, but couldn't completely filter out the smell of machinery and industrial lubricants. They emerged into a sub-basement level devoted to water reclamation and power distribution. From here, they could hear the distant sounds of preparation. The fortress was indeed making ready for a wedding. The ceremony will be in the main hall, Elra whispered as they made their way through dimly lit corridors. Vulparian tradition demands witnesses from both sides. Droskar will want to make this as public as possible to legitimize his claim. They split up according to plan. Cora and Brick would secure their escape route and create diversions. Jax would infiltrate the fortress's computer systems and disable security protocols. Elra and Xanthos would fight their way to the main hall and provide backup. Thorson would go alone to the bride's chambers. The layout of the fortress was a maze of interconnected towers and underground complexes. Thorson moved through servant passages and maintenance shafts, avoiding the main corridors where guards patrolled in precise patterns. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he climbed toward the highest tower where tradition dictated the bride would prepare for her wedding. The door to Tyra's chambers was guarded by 2 of Droskar's elite soldiers, their power armor gleaming with ceremonial decorations. Thorson waited in the shadows until their patrol cycle brought them to the far end of the corridor, then struck like lightning. The first guard died without a sound, Thorson's vibroblade sliding between armor plates to sever his spinal column. The second turned at the sound of his comrade falling and managed to cry out before Thorson's second blade found his throat. Alarms began to wail. Thorson blasted the lock on the door with his plasma pistol and burst into the chamber. The room was vast and opulent, decorated in Vulparian style with flowing fabrics and crystalline sculptures. In the center, surrounded by attending servants who fled, screaming at his entrance, stood Tyra. She was dressed in traditional wedding attire, a gown of white and silver that seemed to capture and reflect light like liquid starshine. But her violet eyes blazed with defiance, and when she saw Thorson, her expression shifted to something between hope and despair. "You came," she breathed. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Before she could answer, the doors burst open again. Warlord Droskar strode in, flanked by a full squad of his personal guard. The warlord himself was an imposing figure, part Vulparian, part cybernetic enhancement. His body a testament to both noble breeding and technological augmentation. "So," Droskar said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience, "the arena produces one last entertainment before the ceremony." "Let her go," Thorson demanded, raising his weapons. "This is between us." Droskar laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Is it? You've killed dozens of my fighters, destroyed millions of credits worth of flesh and machinery, and now you break into my home on my wedding day. I think this is about much more than a single woman. The fight that followed was unlike anything in the arena. Here there were no rules, no audience, no boundaries. Droskar's guards opened fire immediately, forcing Thorson to dive behind an overturned table. Energy bolts scorched the air where he had been standing. But Thorson wasn't alone. Tyra had not been idle during her captivity. She had prepared for this moment, hiding weapons within her wedding dress, studying the guards' routines, planning her own escape. When the shooting started, she produced a slim energy blade from beneath her gown and struck down the guard closest to her. Back to back, they fought as one. Thorson's raw power and arena-honed instincts, combined with Tyra's precise knowledge of Vulparian combat forms, they moved like dancers, like lovers, like two parts of a single warrior. The tide of battle turned when Elra and Xanthos burst through the chamber's secondary entrance, having fought their way up from the lower levels. The Vulparian royal guard and the insectoid warrior carved through Droskar's forces like a scifi through wheat. But Droskar himself was far from finished. The warlord had not survived decades of political intrigue and military campaigns by being weak. His cybernetic enhancements included combat stimulants, reaction boosters, and weapon systems integrated into his very bones. When he shed his ceremonial robes, his true nature was revealed, a fusion of organic tissue and military-grade hardware. You want her so badly? Droskar snarled, energy claws extending from his fingertips. Then die for her. The final confrontation took place in the blazing ruin of the wedding chamber. Furniture burned, tapestries smoldered, and the floor was slick with blood. Droskar fought with the fury of the desperate, his enhanced strength allowing him to match Thorson blow for blow. But Thorson had rage to fuel him. Rage at the injustice of the arena, at the separation from Tyra, at a galaxy that treated sentient beings as property. More than that, he had purpose. He wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for love, for hope, for a future he had never dared to imagine. The ending came suddenly. Droskar overextended in a brutal strike meant to decapitate his opponent. Thorson dropped low, swept the warlord's feet, and drove his blade up through the gap between body armor and helmet. Droskar's augmented reflexes almost saved him, almost. The warlord crashed to the floor, his systems sparking and failing. With his last breath, he whispered, "The pact will avenge." There was no time to puzzle over his final words. The fortress's automated defenses had been alerted, and security forces were converging on their position. Alarms wailed throughout the complex as blast doors sealed and defensive turrets activated. "The hangar," Elra shouted over the noise. "We need to reach the hangar." They fought their way through corridors filled with smoke and flashing emergency lights. Droskar's forces, leaderless and confused, offered scattered resistance. Some surrendered immediately when they recognized Tyra. Others fought to the death out of loyalty or fear. The hangar was a vast cathedral of metal and machinery, filled with everything from personal shuttles to military assault ships. Jax had done his job well. The defense systems were down, and their escape craft waited with engines already warming. But they weren't alone. A full company of soldiers had beaten them to the hangar, taking defensive positions behind cargo containers and maintenance equipment. Their commander, a scarred hegemony cyborg, gestured with his weapon. "Surrender now, and I promise you quick deaths." The answer came not from Thorson, but from the hangar's main entrance. Brick and Cora had completed their mission, and behind them came something unexpected. A strike force of Vulparian Royal Guard in full battle armor, led by a figure Thorson didn't recognize. "My princess," the leader called out, removing his helmet to reveal 8 but determined features. "I am General Vorth. We received your message through the Gladiator's allies. The fleet stands ready." Tyra's eyes widened. "Vorth, but you were exiled with me." and recalled by the Regent Council when news of your imprisonment reached us. The political situation has changed. The battle in the hangar was brief but intense. Caught between two forces, Droskar's remaining soldiers were overwhelmed. Those who survived threw down their weapons and surrendered. As they boarded the escape ship, Thorson felt a strange mixture of triumph and exhaustion. They had done it. Against all odds, they had rescued a Tyra and struck a blow against one of the galaxy's most powerful warlords. But as they lifted off from Hectos Prime, he couldn't shake the memory of Droskar's final words. The pact will avenge. What pact? And what did it mean for their future? The journey back to Vulparian space took 3 days. During that time, Tyra told Thorson the full story of her exile and the political machinations that had led to her father's death. She also shared revelations about the scope of Droskar's influence and his connections to a shadowy organization known as the Shadow Pact. My father discovered their existence shortly before he was assassinated, she explained as they stood together on the ship's observation deck. They're a collection of warlords, crime bosses, and corrupt officials who profit from the current galactic order. Droskar was one of their key operatives. And now he's dead. One head cut from a hydra, but perhaps his death will give us the opening we need. They were married 3 weeks later, in the crystal gardens of the Vulparian capital. The ceremony was attended by representatives from across the galaxy, including a delegation from Earth. The union of a human arena champion and a Vulparian princess became a symbol of hope for a galaxy too long divided by species and politics. Thorson officially resigned his commission in the Human Expeditionary Force to become Tyra's consort and a knight protector of Vulparia. Together, they worked to forge new alliances between their peoples and others who shared their vision of a more just galaxy. The arena of Nexus Station was closed by joint human-Vulparian action, its gladiators freed, and its overseers brought to trial. Magrin himself was sentenced to life in the very cells where he had once kept his prisoners. But not everything ended with the wedding bells. In the months that followed, reports began to filter in of Shadow Pact activity throughout the galaxy. Supply convoys vanished without a trace. Colonial governors died in suspicious accidents. Whole star systems went dark. On their first anniversary, as Thorson and Tyra watched the twin moons of Vulparia rise over the capital city, she turned to him with an expression of resolve that reminded him of their first meeting in the arena medbay. They won't let this stand, she said quietly. The pact won't forgive what we've done. Thorson pulled her closer, his scarred hand tracing the curve of her face. Let them come. We've fought impossible odds before. This is different. This is war. He looked into her violet eyes and saw not fear, but determination. The woman who had hidden her identity to heal gladiators, who had armed herself with hidden blades at her own wedding, who had stood back to back with him against much superior forces, she was ready for whatever came next. Then we'll fight a war, he said simply, together. Above them, the stars looked less cold now. They held promise instead of threat, hope instead of despair. Whatever challenges the Shadow Pact might bring, Thorson and Tyra would face them as they had faced everything else, united by love, strengthened by resolve, and backed by allies who believed in their cause. The gladiator's trails of bodies had led not just to his alien mate, but to a new future for the galaxy itself. And though the Shadow Pact plotted in darkness, the light of hope burned too bright to be easily extinguished. In the distance, warning lights flickered on the communication arrays as encrypted messages flowed between loyalist forces. The next chapter of their story was already beginning. Written in starlight and determination, love and defiance. The arena had made them prisoners. War had made them survivors. Love had made them whole. Now they would make their own destiny among the stars.